Well, good afternoon to you if you're listening from the UK, or if you're somewhere else, it may not be afternoon, it may be morning. And we know that we've got one of our colleagues from Australia here already, so that's absolutely fantastic. We're going to use Mentimeter, or so far as you're concerned, menti.com again today. And I'm just going to quickly flash up the details there. There's a QR code, and there's also the 7-digit code. Mentimeter have kind of incremented to 7 digits from 6 in order for security reasons. So please do go to menti.com and enter that code. And we'll take you through various things. You'll also notice there's a few additional icons down the bottom. And what we want to encourage you to do is vote on our questions to you, send in your questions to us. There's always the reactions, you can like what you see, and there's comments. So if you want to encourage David or maybe even barrack him, then do use the comments as well as we go, which will make the whole thing a lot more fun. Just as I do the rest of the introduction, we're going to go to our standard first question. Where in the world are you joining us from today? We're looking for a lot of interaction. We've got over 200 people have registered for this event, so we're going to try and go for 1 or 2 records. And I can see that we've already got 80 people on the event. So we want to know, where are you joining us from today? The session is scheduled to run through to 1 o'clock. It's a 1-hour session, but David has kindly agreed to stay on for 20 or so minutes afterwards for you to meet the speaker, or sometimes what we call our after show party. But do stay on. We're going to try and make that into a real conversation, and we'll use your questions then if we don't get to them beforehand. We've also uploaded 3 handouts that you'll find really useful, particularly sort of following this event. We're going to ask you what you think about the event as well. We're going to record the event and make the slides and recording available. Carla is working with me in the background to help sort that out and to also deal with any technical issues that you may have got. Carla, incidentally, does maintain our webinar library that we really want you to look at. And for those of you that would like a PDU code, that's there in the welcome message, but we will remind you of it later as we go. So there we are. Where in the world are you today? A good wide range. David, feel free to jump in. Any observations on these questions before I introduce you formally?
No, I think it's fascinating to see the reach that you have, and I'm looking forward to sharing some ideas with PMI, and thanks to Merv and the PMI team for inviting us to come and share some things with you. Brilliant.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're going to find out a little bit about our audience, as we normally do, and we can actually then use this to segment some of our future answers. So really, really useful to us. So if you've got Menti there on your phones, what industry or sector do you typically work in? So this question should come through as a word cloud, and we'll get a good feel for this. Typically, we often see construction and engineering as a front runner. Public sector, we get a lot of people from education. We can see that IT is prominent there, David. I guess this is going to help with focusing some of what you talk about. Any immediate thoughts on what you're seeing?
Well, no, it's a fascinating spread of industries and sectors, and I think it's particularly good to see those sectors outside of construction and infrastructure, which are now starting to appreciate the value of working together, or should I say, working with the supply chain and supply chain partners rather than working on the supply chain partners.
Yes. Okay. Good. So that's a little bit more information. There are a couple of additional questions that, again, I think will help position what David's going to say to us. We're looking at the size of your organization, approximate number of employees. So do please tell us that. We'll wait for a few results to come in and display. We're still waiting. It looks like people have voted, but no results displaying at the moment. So that's a bit strange. I'm going to just jump forward and back and see if that does work. So yes, a little bit of a blip there, but again, we can see a good spread. Quite a number of people here from large organizations, I see, David.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the kind of spread you might expect to see, but
well, it's interesting there that you've got a spread, particularly in the sort of smaller end of the world, where you've got over 20% in what I would term to be small companies. So,
yes.
you know, I think that's particularly pertinent in today's marketplace.
Yes, I would think so, and probably where they sit in the supply chain, etc. So, okay, that's useful information.
It's certainly one of the things that we're working on at the ISO level is 2 new documents which will probably come out first quarter next year. And one is a focus for SMEs on how they can harness collaborative working, but also a parallel document for large companies to help them make it easier for SMEs to access. There's a big divide between little and large.
Yes, yeah, maybe this is reflected in this next question as well, the typical value of projects in your organizations, and
yeah,
really rather big projects right down to a good number of relatively small projects. Might reflect the industry, etc. But useful data.
Indeed.
Okay, so and what role do you typically perform? Many of you may have seen this. One of the things we base this on is the project delivery capability framework that comes from government in terms of the leaders, delivery, and those involved in change and business analysis. But you see there we've got PMO, advisor, consultant, and academic. So the spread's going to be really interesting, and potentially we could have guessed where the spread might. It tends to be a majority around delivery specialists and about 20% in terms of leadership and director. So if we then push on to introduce David, and I'm only going to say a little bit about him. I'm sure he will tell us about himself as we go through. But David has had an extensive career in projects and procurement, and in particular in the construction industry. He's a strategic thinker, and as I've got to know him, I've come to appreciate that. And he's applied partnering concepts widely from all the way through his career from construction and up to today. And he's a published author, multiple publications, but in particular, he was instrumental in developing the British standard and then the ISO standard for collaborative business relationships. So we'll hear a fair bit more about that. One of the things that David has impressed me with is even, although we've gone virtual, David wears his tie, and indeed he's got his tie on today. So I've been thinking about ties. I haven't worn one for about 6 months. So I'm not wearing a tie because I really, I couldn't decide whether to wear this one or to wear this one, which is my old Crime Watch tie, which goes back to the days when I was a copper. But I've not worn either, but I wanted to show them to you. And David, tie-wearing David, I'm going to now change presenter, and then you will be able to take us through the presentation. Apologies for being a little bit cheeky on the tie.
Right, let me just show my screen. Oh, I've got your screen, but not mine.
No, the audience can see your screen. That's fine.
They can. Oh, okay,
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you very much again to PMI for giving us the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. The title of the session was the role of collaboration in complex projects. So as Merv said, I've had quite an extensive career. We were talking just before we started about taking vacations. And since I'd spent the best part of the last 40 years on aeroplanes, I don't do vacations anymore. But I've had the privilege of working on projects on all 5 continents or 6 continents, depends how you like to refer to it. And in a multiplicity of relationships from commercial to government. And I think the challenge in all of these was the most successful projects for me were those where we managed to build the right culture and behaviors. So we worked together for a common outcome. As Merv said, I also chair now the ISO committee, but I would state very clearly, I'm not a standards man. This was the result of evolution of some ideas, which I'll talk about later on. But I do believe there is a role for standards in building a systemic approach to collaboration. My personal view is that people individually are very quick in most cases to build relationships, good or bad. Organizations have a great deal more difficulty. So for many years, the solution to complex behavioral problems and cultural problems was we either decided to bring in a specialist to help us re-engineer the operation, or we brought in a behavioral guru who took us to one side for a weekend, got us going across a field with 2 planks and a yogurt pot, with the hope that they would build a better behavior. The problem with that approach, as I saw it, was that whilst you could build a very interactive session in a couple of days, when you got back to the office or your home base, the systems, processes and cultures of the motherships suddenly imploded on you, and all that you'd learned by mid-morning had dissipated away. So the approach I took was to look at it from a different perspective. And in the early to mid 90s, I got involved with an organization called Partnership Sourcing, which has now morphed into the Institute for Collaborative Working. So we've been around in essence since 1990 with a broad base of industry partners. And I was delighted to see that there are many different industries and sectors of industries represented today, because I think as these projects become more complex, so does the need to have some common language and some common structure, which enables them to work easily together. So before we go into more detail, I'd like to share with you some views on collaboration, and I like to refer to these as myths, monsters, and magic. So if you think about the myths around collaboration, is most people, when I first talk to them, think collaboration is just soft and fluffy. It's just about being nice to each other. It tends to limit personal recognition, often hampers progress. And one area which I think is most important, it inhibits constructive conflict. I don't believe that conflict is a problem, providing that conflict is focused on delivering the best results and the best ideas. It's also an issue that perception that clients only value those who are facing them. And that's becoming less and less true as clients realize that the performance of their programs is dependent not just on the prime contractors and those they are facing, but also the vast network of companies behind them. And I did an exercise some years ago when I was procurement director at Babcock Energy, where we analyzed the number of people who were involved in a particular project. And in the main, we would have maybe 4 or 5 people involved in managing those relationships. But as I went down through the supply chain, it came close to around 70,000 people who had the ability to influence the success of that project. So, getting all of those people focused in the same direction on the same bus and all pulling together is a challenge. The monsters which come up is that people cannot be trusted, which I think is an anomaly. I think in the main people can be trusted. I think the challenge is often that whilst we build relationships which help us build that level of trust on a one-to-one basis, it's the actions of the companies behind them that deter that level of trust being effective. So a whole series of things there, but perhaps the worst of all in all of these is that classic phrase, the way it's always been. We don't like change because change it makes us feel unstable. So if we look at the magic, the magic really is about people. How does management set the tone, set the agenda, drive the support? How do we build joint objectives to drive outcomes and create a culture where logic should override perception? Master and slave structures are fine, but if they interrupt or interfere with the best outcomes, then there is something wrong with the system. And also, if we want it to work, then we need to share the knowledge we have in a constructive way and ensure that success is based on benefits for all and not just opportunist behavior. Now I'm going to hand back to Merv because he's got a question here to ask you.
Yeah, so I've already launched the question and we're getting one or two responses coming in already. So if you haven't already gone to menti.com, please do. But we're after the terms here. We want you to organize them from first to last, most to least frequently used. Collaborative working, collaboration, collaborative behavior, or collaborative. So we'll give you a few more moments to list those. And David, perhaps you can give us sort of sense as to what you see happening.
Well, let's face it, number one doesn't surprise me at all. If I'm honest about it, being somebody who's focused on helping organizations understand how to use collaboration, I get exceedingly frustrated by the fact that collaboration seems to be used these days as punctuation. I did an article a couple of years ago for the Public Sector Executive magazine with the headline, "Collaboration's the answer, what was the question?" and got some really snotty remarks come back about being critical. But collaboration is so broadly used today and so poorly understood in many organizations.
Yeah, okay. And yes, it's interesting as you move down towards the behaviors and description of behaviors, perhaps that the number drops down. But okay, I'll flick back to you and you can press on. So there
Excellent. We are. Okay. My screen up now?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. So the question we asked was, how many of these terms have you heard? And we saw collaboration coming out at the fore. I need just to...
Yeah, if you go on to the next one.
Yeah. Hang on. Right.
Next slide and then run away.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, this is fun. Okay, that's the previous one. I don't want that.
Yeah.
There we go. So we had collaboration, collaborative behavior, collaborative working. And I'd just like to set the agenda, and at least from my perspective, the thinking that goes behind this. Collaboration without context is just an aspiration. Collaborative without setting expectations is wishful thinking. Collaborative behavior without definition provides no measure of reality. And collaborative working without rules of engagement simply creates chaos. So I think we've got another question.
We have indeed. So I've already displayed it. People will be voting shortly. It's a scale question. So there we are. In my organization or experience, relationships are viewed as key to project and program success. And the scale there from 1 to 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree. And again, David, please comment on this. We've got a spread as well that achieves this average figure.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised at those who say it's key to success. What I will say is that in many discussions I have had over the years when we talk about collaboration, the organizations who say relationships aren't important, until you ask them what was the most successful program they ever worked on, and then realize that actually the reason it was successful was because they had a great relationship either with a client or their partners or their key suppliers. So
okay.
it's still not on the prime agenda as far as I'm concerned.
No. Okay, let's change back to presenter. I can see that a couple of questions have come in already that you can upvote on, so keep those coming in. And David, back to you now to share your screen.
Okay. So from my perspective, I mean, relationships are a journey. If you look at the curve here, it starts at the very low edge, confrontational, which for a large part of my career was what I was expected to be. Coming from a procurement background, that probably wouldn't surprise people. It moves through what I would call compliant, which I think is particularly challenging when you're dealing with well-established organizations, and to some extent with many government organizations, where it's simply a question of complying to what they want. I have to say cooperative is a term that really gets my goat, because cooperative to me is generally business as usual, but with a smile on your face. So where we look to is collaboration, collaborative working, and to achieve that high level, there are two key factors. One of those is value creation. It has to deliver value, and mutual trust, which again is often heralded as the key to collaboration. But in general, I think it's true to say that trust is something that incrementally grows between organizations and individuals doing the right thing. And what we looked at from an organizational point of view was we looked at two factors. And as I mentioned earlier on, the issue of process re-engineering, how do we get the systems working together, and how do we get the people working together? And my view is that you can't achieve value creation and mutual trust unless you can intertwine those two together to be mutually supportive. So we look around the world today, and as we said earlier on, it's fascinating to see the number of people who have come online from across the globe. But we now live in a world of completely interdependence. That probably doesn't matter where you are in the world or almost what you are delivering. It's almost certain that you will be dealing with companies and individuals from across the globe. And I guess the recent pandemic has shown us how vulnerable that process can be if it's not managed effectively. So interdependence, the thing to think about is, how do we survive and be successful if we don't understand that behind the contracts and the lawyers, there are relationships which need to work together in order to deliver the right outcomes. In many of the complex programs that I've been involved with, and I'm sure many of you have, there are an inordinate number of players involved in the program. And many of these come from different industries with different languages, with different cultures, and together they need to be linked in order to deliver the outcomes we want. Now, you can do that by contracts and you can do it by authority, but actually it's around the relationships where that glue comes together to help deliver the outcomes. I'm glad to see we've got representatives from government online as well. And this is a real challenge. If you look at the center of this slide, There are three key elements here. On the government side, you've got accountability. There are huge pressures on government departments to deliver to budgets, to meet political agendas, to react to political change. There's change in the middle, and then you come to the other side of the equation, which is the industrial partners and commercial organizations who naturally are driven by profitability, their shareholders, and a whole host of different pressures for them. And I think one of the things we miss many times is understanding what is driving our partners from whichever sector they come to understand how different situations impact them as programs develop. Now, this slide is very old, but it's one which I think is pertinent to the whole collaborative intent. If we look at the donkeys at the moment, we spend huge amounts of time pulling against each other, both internally and externally, to achieve our individual goals. And I often like to use this when I'm meeting with senior executives, because in my mind, I'm imagining many of them as donkeys with a very fixed tunnel vision on simply their outcomes. But what we see from that is a huge lack of consistency, conflicting agendas, internal stress, most of all wasted effort and failed outcomes. And one of the things I like to do sometimes when I'm on conferences and workshops is just ask people how efficient in generic terms they think their organization is. And you'd be surprised to find anybody who thinks that their own organization is better than 70% efficient, which then leads you to believe that if two or more organizations get together, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that there's huge amounts of waste and effort, which is frustrating the end goal. So very simply, if we could operate more collaboratively and get the donkeys to talk to each other, we can work out a program together which enables us to achieve the outcomes which deliver mutual benefit. So clarity of purpose, joint objectives, complementary skills, optimization of resources, certainly joint management and integrated processes aimed at mutual benefit. That doesn't take a lot to understand, and I think it's not uncommon to fall back on people like Einstein, who reputedly said, the definition of insanity is repeating the same behaviors and expecting a different outcome. And I'm afraid to say so many times, I see that historical approach to business and to major programs being replicated time and time again, but people saying, oh, but we're going to be collaborative this time, but they never really are, because collaboration isn't a systemic part of their thinking and business processes. So we're going to hand back to Merv and Mentimeter.
Yep. Okay, and see one or two people have already been answering this question. So what are the benefits of collaborative working? Well, again, you can see those answers coming through. Please do send in your responses. I think David's touched on some of these as we've on the previous couple of slides. But David, if you want to talk to these, I'll leave them scrolling through at the moment as people enter data.
Oh, there's certainly some interesting thoughts there, and yeah, the one I liked up front was it's more fun. And quite honestly, if you get up in the morning and work is going to be a pain in the backside, then having fun at work is definitely something that will foster better performance. Interestingly enough, we've done some work within the Institute across our members with a very simple focus on why do people want to work in a collaborative environment, and getting management and senior executives to understand that actually this is a great way to encourage people to join organizations, come into industries which perhaps they didn't think were suitable for them, and to retain staff in a world where, you know, I'm sad to say, I had a birthday yesterday. I'm 73 years old, and when I started work, the expectation was you were going to join a company and you would retire from that same company. Today, the average millennial generation probably won't stay with a company for more than 3 years unless that company makes it interesting and exciting and provides opportunities. So there's a big issue around the people side of benefits of collaboration.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting. And your career point, well, I had 25 years in policing, but you always expected to do your full length of service before perhaps you went on to another career. But the point I've really spotted about here, and we've got some fantastic results, is I work as a benefits management specialist, and you typically run workshops and you think about your program, etc., and what would be the benefits. There's some fantastic responses that have come through here that you know, if you could capture those in one of your virtual workshops nowadays, then you know it would be great to get that information. So I'm going to use this again, I think. But let me
I'll be definitely looking for those from you, Merv, after this session, because I'm going to feed that back to our professional development people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you'll get a copy of that, and everyone who's contributed, they get a copy straight afterwards. So but let me flip this back to you now.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. So one of the things we did a while back through Warwick Business School was to do a study on what senior executives thought were the benefits of collaborative working. And the first reaction after we finished the exercise was surprised by the academics that lowest on the top 12 elements was lowering operating costs. Because they'd always perceived that the reason people went into partnering and collaboration was actually simply to reduce cost. From an operational factor and a psychological factor, my view was that if you simply concentrate on the cost, then everybody becomes defensive. But it's not that difficult to understand that if you look at the other 11 issues that they highlighted at the, from their research, you know, better problem solving, better reputation, customer satisfaction, increased trust, etc. All of those will indirectly provide a commercial benefit, which is a real frustration for me when I sit with financial officers of companies whose only interest is, well, if we collaborate, how much is it going to improve the bottom line? So there's perception that, you know, collaboration's all about saving money. I think it does, but I think that's the wrong target. Okay, the other challenge that comes up, of course, is leadership. And I picked this particular slide from a friend of mine, sent it to me to remind me that the leader is the conductor of an orchestra. And in theory, they're the only one who does not make a noise unless, I guess, the orchestra goes out of tune. But it's a common factor that we need to focus on a different kind of leadership for the future. I've often said I worked for some brilliant project managers in the past who on a dark night when the problems were flying, they were the best people to be behind. But actually, I wouldn't put many of them on the floor of the United Nations to conduct a diplomatic debate. I think we also fail to recognize that in relationships, these have a huge impact on risk. And it's an area that we've addressed many times, that risk is probably the biggest influence on behaviors, whether that's personal, whether it's functional, divisional, company-wide. market-wide. Every time there's a risk, there is a reticence and an impact on behavior. The other issue, which I think often comes up, is strategic imperatives. I've always been an advocate of Sun Tzu, and as you see, you know, a little bit of publicity, but this book's been around for a while now. But my expression was that if you don't focus on the strategy first and just jump to tactics, then you're going to miss many of the opportunities that exist by working with external organizations. So Merv, back to you.
Yes, indeed. So I put the next scale question up. Let me just flick across and share my screen. So yeah, two-part question. In my organization experience, when considering a program, relationships are seen as from not at all important to very important, or in my organization experience, when considering the tendering or evaluation relationships are seen as. And we can then look at the difference. We've got an overall average, and you can see the spread coming in there. So David, is this the kind of responses you'd expect to see?
Yes, I think the challenge, and I'll come to this a little later in the session, the challenge for me is in the tendering process. I think one of the mistakes we've made over the years is that we have very well established traditional tendering and evaluation processes. We go through the negotiations, or bloodletting, as I used to call it. We get to a contract, and then we start talking about how we're going to work well together. If collaboration is fundamental and mission critical to the output, then from my perspective, it needs to be addressed much earlier in the process. So the curves don't surprise me, but I think there's a learning curve here that says if you want collaboration to work, you've got to address it much sooner in the process.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back.
There you go.
Whoops. Hello, what have we done here? Right. Sorry, it jumped forward. I beg your pardon. So one of the areas that we've been advocating a lot more attention to is the internal business case, focusing right up front on why do we want to do collaborative working. And I get frustrated on occasions by being asked by senior executives, you know, we want to be collaborative, we want to implement this new international standard. And when I ask why, they say, well, we want the badge on the wall so we can tell everybody how good we are. But when you look at their processes don't necessarily address this as early as they should. And I think it's, you know, traditional from a procurement person point of view. You know, we used to have a process where you'd go to tender, you do an evaluation, you do a negotiation, and you make a decision. And at the point you made a decision, it was already so late in the process that you then handed power to your external partners or supply chain partners. If we want collaboration to work, we have to address this much sooner. So I just put this in just to remind people that, you know, this may be common sense, but it's not very common. And it was Voltaire back in 1694 that said this, so I can't claim any credit for being much of a philosopher. So question.
Yeah. Here we go. Let's just change and share that. Okay, oh, that looks better. So have you heard of or applied ISO 44001? So the international standard known as 44001. And I'm going to let you comment on these, David. I did think we might do, let me just, let's segment this and see whether we get anything interesting come through. So if we do segment by role typically performed. Okay, so in terms of ISO, we've got all the way from never heard of it to have used or are using it. And we've then changed from role to see whether that tells us anything new. So, David, what do you think?
Well, on the basis that I'm colorblind, it's very difficult for me to tell which ones are which. But
Yeah.
when I look at the percentages, disappointing but not surprised.
Yes.
You know, I think it is new. I mean, if I asked the world at large what they knew about ISO 9001, you'd probably have a huge number on the far right,
Yeah.
which would do it. What we have to remember is that ISO 9001 was published in 1976, I think, or 77, somewhere around there. You know, ISO 44001 is only 3 years old.
Mm.
Uh,
I think that's a remarkable figure. I think have used or using it, almost a third. But
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean
So
that's quite pleasing. I mean, if you add all of those together, the ones that have never heard it, we've still got over 50% that have at least some knowledge of it. So that's good from our perspective. I just wish there were more.
yes.
I think
Okay.
they would
So
find it helpful. Okay.
yeah, there we go.
Okay, so if I just give you a quick bit of history, all of this started back in 2004 as a result of research that we were doing on the future of business relationships. And I produced something called the craft model, which was adopted by BSI as a PAS 11,000 back in 2006. It trundled along for a while, and then we did a pilot on certification, and suddenly it started to take off. So we moved to a British standard, and then we were close in 2013, I think it was, where it was suggested perhaps this could go international. And we were about to revise 11,000 and turn it into a new version or revise it up. And then we got clearance to go to ISO. So we have up to 30 countries who've been involved in that process. And 44,001 was published in 2017. I'll give you a little better background to that. Up until about a week before publication, it was going to be ISO 11001. And then ISO discovered they'd already used that number back in the 1980s. So they gave us a choice of numbers. I was running a workshop. We took a vote and we picked 44,000 because 44 is the UK dialing code. So if you wonder how it ever got that number, that's the rationale. More recently, we've published the principles for collaborative working and the guidance document last year. And we're now working on 2 documents around the small company sector. So the whole reason for benefits of a framework standard, and there are many different issues here, but public-private sector, common languages between industries, consistency, a greater reference on the risk management and how relationships could do that. But rather than go through these in detail, which I'm sure is going to be shared with you, the biggest issue for me is a neutral starting point. You know, I've seen organizations in the past who say you will collaborate and this is the way you will do it, rather than having a framework standard which allows you to develop the solution between the parties that are involved. So here are the principles that we came up with, 12, and this is a good starting point for most organizations who haven't looked at 44,001, because the standard itself is quite voluminous. It's about 78 pages, whereas the principles permeate all of those 78 pages. And what many organizations find is that much of what they're being asked to do, they are already doing, but they haven't necessarily joined up the dots. And then, of course, you've got the standard, which now aligns to the high level structure, which means many of the other standards that organizations, management standards that organizations are working to, are aligned with the collaboration. And that's the whole idea of how do we bring collaboration into the concept of business as usual. How it fits together with the original craft model and the 8 steps. This is just a simple diagram in terms of the high level structure running across the top and the operational structure running down. And there are some duplications and connections between all of those. But coming back, there's a corporate level, there's an operational engagement level, and at the end of the day, I believe, although there is always work to be done, this is the first time ever there is a standard published which firstly has a major focus on behaviors and also is one of the few standards that you can certify to where you can't certify unless you can demonstrate external relationships. So just as a guide to the 8 steps, the cycle that we came back with was an initial awareness. Does it meet the corporate demands? Is there knowledge? Oh, hang on, I've got the wrong slide. Here we go. So, we can see how it fits with the organization. We go back to this early stage of saying, is collaborative working key and important? Do we have the skills and the strengths to be able to adopt a collaborative approach? And how do we engage potential partners to find the right fit? Now, what you'll see from those first 4 stages is that they are in effect go, no go decisions. And we have had cases where organizations have got to working together and decided that there is no true sense that collaboration will help. So we need that working together, we go through and look at a joint collaborative approach. How do we continue to add value during the engagement How do we manage the relationships and performance? And unfortunately, too often we get bound up in reporting and positive outcomes and quantitative deliverables, and we miss the fact that the relationships, if managed effectively, are a great indicator of performance issues to come. And finally, the exit strategy, which actually appears under knowledge as one of the key things. Do we want to go into a relationship when we haven't yet defined the processes of how we disengage? So another question.
Okay, yeah, here we go. Does your organization have a structured process to manage mission critical relationships? So does it have a structured process? We're getting towards the 2/3 no. I think I want to segment this one. Didn't necessarily work last time, but I was going to do it by size of organization. Size of organization. I appreciate colorblind, as you say. But,
well, I think the biggest the biggest worry I observed from that, Merv, is if you go back to the earlier slide where we said relationships were important to success, and then you've got a disproportionate number of organizations who don't have any structured approach to managing those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you made the point about partner selection, and it'd be important to know who to partner with and perhaps who not to partner with. So,
indeed,
yeah, this is definitely a bit of a worry. Let me just flick back to you. I'm conscious time-wise. I think it looks like we're going to hold those questions over to beyond the hour, but
I'm afraid so. But I'll go through these quickly because I don't think that I think people need time to digest them anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just go back one or two. So as I mentioned, the standard is very much focused around cultural issues and behaviours. I think it's interesting to understand what behaviours are rewarded in companies. The master slave, the blame culture. How do we understand that? I put this one in basically because I always think it's provocative, and that is I found this website with the most destructive human behaviors, and then realized for a large part of my career that most of these bad behaviors were career enhancing capabilities. Practitioners we talked to, again, using Warwick Business School to understand what were those key ingredients which make people good at collaboration or sympathetic to it. And the point which came out most was those being strategically minded. And the issue there was, if I ask somebody or tell somebody to do something, do I consider whether or not it has an impact on them personally? The standard itself and the guidance I've talked about, the partner profiling, in terms of how do we see selection of partners and what ingredients do we look for, what characteristics do we look for. We also need to remember, of course, that our potential partners are looking at us for the same kind of constituents. So remember, it applies to you from a partner's perspective. Focusing on key objectives, and when two organizations come together, there are always three: yours, mine, and ours. And if we don't meet all three, the relationship's going to get into trouble. We need to think about the contracting models, but I do think there's an overemphasis on what I would call contracting for failure. And in general, it's not the contract that's the problem, it's the way the contract is used. I talked a little bit about measuring the behaviors, and there are many areas where you can do this, looking both at the quantitative and the qualitative issues in order to see whether your relationships are going in the right direction. As I said, we measure most programs by the outputs, which are looking through the rear view mirror. And if we look at the behaviors, we will be looking at the windscreen and spotting those relationships which are potentially going to cause us problems in the future and will eventually result in quantitative and performance issues. So last question, I think, Merv.
Okay, let's just share my screen. And so it's another scale question. I didn't launch it quite so early, so it may take a few moments for answers to come in. But in my organizational experience, relationship management is viewed as essential to future success. Do you strongly agree with that statement or strongly disagree? So we can see we're getting an average of about 4, but again, quite a wide spread there in terms of that particular question.
And I think part of that comes from the fact that organizations, one of the things the standard does do is promote the idea of being selective about which relationships do need a collaborative approach. And I think, collaborative behaviors can run across any kind of relationship, but a structured approach is where it becomes mission critical. And I think one of the problems is that organizations see relationships in the round, and I don't believe they are. I think they are segmented across the approach. So, I take 2 examples. If I want to buy 1,000 pencils, I'll go out to the market and just go on lowest price and quality. If I want to design the next strike fighter, where you've got a 50-year relationship between your plane manufacturer and your engine manufacturer, you better be worrying about the relationship you're going to have in 10 years' time.
Yeah. Makes
okay, so I'm almost there. If we can go back.
Yeah, definitely. There you go.
Should be back up there now.
Yeah, that was the Mentimeter question.
Oops, I can't get on. Hang on. Right, there we go.
Yeah.
So as a parting shot, just remember you can't collaborate on your own. You may be sitting in the boat, but if it's going down, you're all going to get your feet wet. So just a gentle reminder. And something that I agree with Merv I'd put in is just a little note. We've all suffered over the last 6 months with the pandemic. We've seen great examples of how collaboration can help. We've seen the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our organisations, and we hear an awful lot of chat about the new normal. And you know, at ICW, we've got a session on the 8th of September where we're going to have a general discussion about this. And I've invited PMI and a number of other organisations to come along and share their views and their perspectives. So if you're interested in joining that and you'd like to drop me an email, I'll be happy to invite you along. And finally, that's it. So thank you for that. An interesting exercise. I've never worked with this technology before, but I must admit it does provide some interesting insight.
Yes, indeed. So, well, thank you for using it and indulging us with it. And as I say, the results will be made widely available. As is usual on this, we ask for people a little bit of reflective practice here and now. What have you learned or will do differently as a result of attending this webinar? And clearly, for some of you, this will amount to a PDU. And you know that again, this is part of the professional development. Remind you of those handouts as well, and I think they'll probably make a whole lot more sense now you've heard from David on this. So we're getting some great feedback on this reflective practice. Do keep it coming, and we will make sure that we learn from this. So so there we are, reflective practice. I'm going to just push on as we get close to the hour. So David mentioned the session on the, I think it was the morning of the 8th, David, at 10 o'clock.
Indeed, yep.
So there we are, there's his contact details, but if you don't get a chance to note them, then just get in touch with us and we'll make sure you've got that and you get your invite. I know that Chris Field, PMI UK president, is hoping to go along and provide his perspective on that. So that's great. And let's just look at those are the questions. This is the question slide. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So what I wanted to do, just for those of you that need to leave us at 1 o'clock, was just give you our forward program. It's quite small there. You will find it on the digital event listing on the PMI UK website. But there we are in terms of speakers. We've got Nigel Smith next week, one of our digital events team, talking about prepare to perform, to stand and deliver. That's a Toastmasters related session. We've got Kevin Parry on the 17th, who's going to talk about human factors, the challenge of managing benefits, that I think fits well with what we've got today. And then we've got a couple of events where we're partnering with the Major Projects Association. So we're covering major projects with VIAS. And then we've got a real special on the 30th of September, which is the launch of the Project Data Analytics Task Force. And there'll be a lot more information coming out, but they have a very strong vision to improve the performance of project delivery. So do please join us if you can for that one. And then, in fact, it's my own one. I'm going to work with Jonathan Norman on the 1st of October around reinventing webinars. So those are our upcoming events. Do please come along to that. Give us some feedback about this one. And we put an extra question in here. We want you to suggest speakers or topics for future events. So I'm just going to hide the results on that slide as you enter those. So we can have kind of independent suggestions. It'd be interesting if we get 2 or more the same. So that question will be there and available to you. So I'll make it 1 o'clock. If you do need to disappear now, then please do. but we're going to go into those questions that we've got, and let's start having a look at those. Do please send in further questions via Mentimeter, and we'll take them in order. So these have been ordered by the upvoting, and I'm going to give David an opportunity to read them off the screen, because some of them are quite long, and it's great that we've got this so we can keep us true to what the question is, but it means you don't have to remember the start of the question by the time you get to the end, David. So I'm sure you appreciate that. I do.
No, it's fine. I mean, I'll take that first one because I share a degree of skepticism behind this. I agree with you. I think there's a challenge at the moment where we are seeing government contracts coming out which are mandating collaboration and even mandating the use of or certification to 44,001. Firstly, I would argue that you can't mandate collaboration. It's an oxymoron. It just doesn't work. And I think the second part of that, and we've been having lots of discussions at the moment with various government departments, including the Cabinet Office and the MOD, saying, if you want collaboration to work, you have to be part of the collaboration. You can't just mandate it in a single direction. So, yes, I think it's a problem, but I think that problem goes back to years of custom and practice. And I think if they need to change, and I'll give you a quick example of a response to that. I was in discussions a little while ago with the head of maintenance for the US Air Force, because I'd done some work on the F-35 strike fighter. And he said, my problem is the strike fighter is a computer with wings. It's not a jet fighter. And my problem is I have vacancies for 600 software engineers and I can't compete with Silicon Valley. And my response to that was, your problem is that you've got the wrong relationship with the supply chain. And I think, we did one of our share and learn sessions a little while ago with the defense sector. And the challenge that came out from that was 30 organizations sitting around the table saying, what, we could do far more for government if government would listen to us and stop dictating to us. So, the change is coming, but it's going to be slow.
Okay, I'm conscious the questions are flooding in, so let's move on.
No worries.
If I just show that one as answered, and I guess some people may not see the screen, so it might help if I just read it out and give you something like, companies write values on policy, but often don't practice it. Now that we've moved to a virtual work environment, do you think it is important to practice the value than putting it on policy paper?
I think it's important anyway, whether you're doing it virtually or face to face. One of the challenges is, and I talked about the bad behaviors and the worst human behaviors. I see bad behaviors within organization not being addressed simply because it's driving short-term performance. So, the good old days of the sales guy who lies through his teeth to win the contract, and then gets his bonus for doing it, and then hands the contract to some implementer who then says, who the hell signed this? So you're absolutely right. And I think more and more we're going to see values become a factor in selection processes, because organizations are now coming under pressure to meet the values that they show. I think, one of the books I did was on corporate social responsibility, and in a discussion with a government minister who said we needed more regulation. And I said, the problem with regulation is it doesn't change behaviors. It just fuels the coffers of lawyers and accountants.
Yeah. Okay. Good answer. Let's move on to the next question. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Just starting to work together. What about Egan and Latham rethinking construction? Does that mean anything to you?
Indeed, it does, because Sir Michael Latham was actually chairman of PSL when I joined.
Right.
And he did have a very, very strong focus on collaboration in the construction industry. I think there is still a lot of change to take place. And I think that change is going to be forced because as prime contractors are becoming less and less important, shall we say, and a greater reliance on the supply chain, clients are going to start looking at how major contractors work with their supply chain. I think the problem with the Egan report, and again, it's all very good stuff, but there was never a methodology behind it to say this is how we do it. So I think, you know, the chances are we are moving collaboration into a more systemic model. I wouldn't say it's perfect. You know, the one thing you have to remember about international standards is they're put together by people, and they tend to be the lowest common denominator between a group of consenting adults.
Yeah.
So over time it will change, but I think putting a mechanism in place actually holds people's feet to the fire.
Yeah, I agree on that, and I think there's also elements of the kind of people know what they should be doing, but there's a whether they do it or not. We talk about the knowing doing gap. I think
Yep,
that
absolutely.
that plays to that. So you might write many reports, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. But
Well, we periodically have done this in construction for the last 20 years, and I still
mm,
find cases which are appalling.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of questions from Ardash, and if we had less, we'd probably be opening your mic, Ardash, but maybe we won't today with the time. But new and future normal is work from home. Don't you feel it is important for company to practice their core values rather than just putting it on paper and policy?
Yeah, I think that's a similar question, and I think
Yeah,
part of that working from home is why we've got this session starting on the 8th of September, and we'll see where that goes from there. Um, I think, you know, on the one hand, right now, we've got organizations where financial controllers are saying, you know, we can reduce the number of offices we've got so we can make people work from home. But I think, you know, to go back to one of the original questions when we started this session, if relationships are important, I'm afraid to say the more virtual we become, the more likely it is that those relationships will weaken.
mm. So here we go. Interested in your thoughts on the role of psychological safety in collaboration.
I think we've got another special interest group that's actually looking at things like attitudes and behaviors, and we've got some psychologists and specialists looking at this. I think you're absolutely right. It is important. I remember my first work, the first job I had working on site, where I sat through a 3-hour safety presentation, and as I walked out of the room, my boss said to me, just remember this, Dave, you've got a 5-foot thick book to go through. But if you look after the guy next to you, he'll look after you and you'll both go home safely.
Yes, yeah. That's wise words. Okay, let's push on. So in current political landscape, both in the UK and globally, are we going backwards on collaboration, especially between countries and blocks of countries?
I think that I think that collaboration is being overshadowed by political rhetoric right now. You know, my experiences of dealing in different countries around the world, from those with a very proletariat approach. Um, you know, we can go from the US to China and see almost the same rhetoric coming out of both countries. In between times, business is being done by businessmen. Um, Yes, I think there will be some restrictions on that, but I think they're politically driven rather than practically driven. And I think more importantly, in a global supply chain and a global network, the more there is political change, the more important it is to have those kind of relationships where you can have a discussion on how do you solve a problem rather than simply throwing your hands up in the air and saying it's too late because the politicians say we can't do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably get me shot, that one, but you never know.
Knowing you, you've never been afraid to speak your mind, David. So that's always good, I think. But why would anyone want to run a project with a non-collaborative team? I've seen no evidence that aggressive and selfish approaches work. So why do people still keep using them?
Custom and practice. You know, there are still those who think that the only external partner is one that's bleeding to death and that you're making all the profit. And it doesn't work.
No.
You know, every project I've worked on that has been successful has been probably because we've kept the lawyers out of the room and the accountants, and we've actually worked on what do we need to do to make it happen.
Yeah. I like your Venn diagram of the the joint objectives being the kind of third set of objectives.
Absolutely. If we understand what everybody wants and needs, we can make things happen.
Okay, so I sense that collaboration proponents undervalue the basic cost improvement benefit, thus improving profit and ROI. It's almost as though it's a dirty subject. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's fascinating. You know, I had a discussion with a major rail operator some time ago that we deal with. And you know, I listened to a lawyer for 2 hours telling us all the pitfalls of going into what they called an alliance. And at the end of the discussion, I said, "Well, that's brilliant, except for the fact that can you tell me how many of your projects were delivered on time to the quality you wanted at the price you agreed to pay?" And they said none. I said, "So what's the bigger risk?" You know, if you got what you asked for when you asked for it, and at the standard you wanted it, would you be happy? And they said yes. So, you know, the challenge with collaborative working is that collaboration is that everybody wants to put a figure to the benefit. Most of which goes back to a project in the late 80s called BP Andrew, which was delivered for 30% less because of the style and the way in which BP ran it. And then everybody expects that as soon as they go into partnership or collaboration, they're going to save 30%. I just think it's a catalyst for getting things done.
Yeah. Okay, that makes an awful lot of sense. So another question from Ardesh. New and future normal is work from home. Maybe we've had that one. Let's answer. Let's show that as answered. I'm going to show that one as answered. Sorry, Ardesh, but we're probably limited on time. My opinion is importance should be given to behaviour and trust. If that is provided, productivity will increase and targets will be automatically met.
I absolutely agree. I don't think there's any doubt in that in my mind. And I think every one of us intuitively knows if we've got the right behaviors and we trust the people around us, we get on and get the job done. The challenge is that trust is very easily lost and very hard to create. And if you have long-term programs with transitions of people going in and out, unless you have some form of systemic approach which ensures that those behaviors are wanted, are measured, are monitored and addressed, then it's likely that trust levels will drop. And you know, we get into all sorts of complicated processes. I saw a site survey the other month with 120 questions on it, and I'm not being unkind, but probably 80% of the people on that site didn't understand the questions, let alone know how to answer it. There are very simple mechanisms just to understand the temperature, but if bad behaviors are tolerated and not addressed, then trust will very quickly dissipate away.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with you on surveys can be a really blunt tool and not very helpful in kind of understanding these things.
best one I ever saw was a flip chart on the exit to a site office with a line down the middle which said "Good day, bad day," and you just
Yes.
tick the box on the way out. And the following morning, the site director called all the team leaders in and said, "There's too many ticks on a bad day. What went wrong? What do we need to address? How do we make it move?"
Yeah. Yeah. Good old flip chart technology, eh? But,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think stress is a behavior. Shouldn't we consider how stress affects behavior?
I think it does, but I think bad behaviors will correct. It's the other way round. I think bad behaviors will increase stress. They will reduce trust and they will reduce the level of engagement.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I think we're going to get more and more stressful as the new normal comes in and we have to spend all our lives in a two-dimensional world looking at a screen. Um,
Yeah.
it's going to get
Yeah.
stressful. Certainly is for old timers like me.
Oh, these webinars can get quite stressful at times, but we're doing okay. Shouldn't speak too soon. So we've got here, I've seen many tenders that talk about collaboration, the environment, the people, yet tender
Yep.
winners still appear to choose on cost.
Yeah, and I think that is a big problem still. One of the issues that I do like is what some organisations have done now, which is a two-tier tender process, which is where they've identified that collaborative working or the relationship is mission critical. The first level of evaluation is on the ability and the fit between the organisations, and then they go to cost with the shortlisted companies. Um, if you look, for example, at Network Rail in the UK, some of their projects now have 20% of the evaluation, if not more, based on the sort of collaborative cultural environment. Well, if that's £1 billion project, that's putting $200 million or pounds on the strength of collaboration. So it is coming, but it comes back to this point that I mentioned earlier on, that if it's not identified early in the process as mission critical, then the inevitability is that the organization will revert to the old style of lowest cost wins.
Yeah, yeah, okay. We've still got some great questions here. Well, I'll give it about another 5 minutes or so. I'll let you read that. It sounds like the dog's barking.
Well, it's an interesting one. How do you do it? I would make it very, very clear within organizations that consider collaboration has a value, that the business case for any program clearly defines collaborative working and is interrogated by those who have the power to sign off on those business cases. Forget all the process that follows. If it's not part of the business case, it won't have the strength. One of the problems that we have, and I see this in some areas of government and some big organizations, is we actually write business cases simply to justify a decision we've already made instead of it being the strategic driver for the direction of travel.
Yeah, I mean, the subsequent question for me in terms of the 5 case model, is there a particular case that you would see emphasizes this relationship management piece?
I think it's a number of factors. We've got a little model that we use for positioning relationships, and it goes through a whole series of things. So, if you want to buy something that already exists, if you want to buy concrete, for example, the issue isn't around the cost of concrete because everybody knows what that is. You can do that almost on the back of a cigarette packet. The challenge is if we want to use less concrete, then we need to be more reliant on the capabilities of the people who design how much we use.
Yeah.
So you've got this this sort of conflict between cost, risk, time, and complexity.
Yeah.
And it's a common, and that's why I keep saying it. It has to go back to the business case, which says, if we're going to go to the market, we need to know whether we need an integrated relationship or not. And that then drives all the processes from that point on.
Okay, I'm conscious we're almost up to 20 past. We'll just take one more question, and you can no doubt look at other questions beyond this and maybe publish some answers. But here in New Zealand, wow, one of your team here up in late into the night or early into the morning.
Oh, they're heroes down there. They don't sleep.
They take this stuff seriously, but yeah, what do you think?
I think that's true. And, you know, I wouldn't argue that it's rampant in any other country at this moment other than the UK. And that's primarily because there were two organisations which back in 2010 decided to put a major emphasis on the British standard. One was Network Rail, the other one was the MOD. Both of whom have major programs that they cannot achieve without external parties. So the UK is way ahead. But I can tell you that it's popping up now in all sorts of places. I just spent 5 days on training courses online in China.
Right.
So when the Chinese start talking about collaboration, you've got to realize that something serious is beginning to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, look, we're going to leave it there for questions for now. I'll just flick through to the other slides. So you will get details of these, but the 5 events that are coming up shortly. And I do think there's a really good relationship to some of these. In particular, I was thinking about the data analytics task force approach, which I think is well worth considering in the context of collaboration. So those are the events. Suggestions of speakers or topics. Let's do a big reveal and see what you've suggested here. So yeah, we've got some stuff to look at, and we will make sure we respond to that. Even some details of speakers that we can use in the future. So,
well, certainly one of those, Merv, top left-hand corner, leadership. There are 2 exercises going on within ICW right now. We have a special interest group around collaborative leadership, and later this year, Warwick University, in association with ICW, is going to be launching a new MSc program on collaborative leadership.
Okay.
That's a big issue for the future.
Yeah. I mean, I personally was quite interested in some of the measurement and performance detail that goes around collaborative relationships. So maybe that's something we could do a little bit more of.
I'll give you and everybody else a little insight to that one, and that is before you start worrying about measuring and the complexity of measuring behaviors, just remember Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And that was every time you try to measure something, you impact it. So actually the methodology is less important than the fact that you're doing it because you're raising the profile.
Yeah. Okay. I think that sounds a bit like the Hawthorne effect as well, as I recall it in factory productivity. But okay, well, it's been a absolutely fantastic session. So, well, I've really enjoyed it, and people have obviously also the same. We've got something like 50 attendees still here, and we had about 130, I think, at the top of the presentation. So,
very good.
Thank you very much. Go on.
My pleasure. Thanks to all of you, and for those of you on far distant places, take care, stay safe, and you can go to bed now.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's David's contact details if you do want to follow up with that SIG session or learning session next week. Okay, so super. We'll leave it at that. And thanks, Carla, for working in the background to make sure that things were very, very smooth today. And
indeed,
hopefully we'll see you next week.
Brilliant. Right.